Hello and welcome back to Nathan Bell's podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe and share with your friends. Today, Nate would like to talk about poverty.
Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about poverty. I've thought about poverty a lot over my life. It's interesting in Australia, there's definitely people in poverty in Australia, but at least in Australia we have Centrelink. So most people have got some money. There are parts of the world where people don't have any money, and I do think real serious poverty is where you have no money at all and you have no access to food or clean water, and you have no access to medicine. We're very lucky in Australia. People who have low incomes can still access medicine through Medicare and healthcare, and people can still have access to money for groceries through Centrelink and welfare payments that they receive from the government. So at least we don't live in a country where some people are living in absolute desolate poverty without access to any of those things. So, yeah, and what I realise is, I'm very grateful I was born in this country. I have mental health issues. I can work and I do work and I could work more. But I struggle to work, and I'm able to receive the disability support pension because in this country we give that to people with mental health issues like me. I have bipolar schizoaffective disorder, and there are countries in the world where people who can't work for various reasons don't have access to any money, and they basically just starve and die. And what I've realised is most of the world lives in poverty, and I think Australians are so privileged we don't realise, the majority of the world lives in poverty. And when I say poverty, as I said, that is not having access to clean water, not having access to food, not having medicine, children dying of famine, parents who, living in shacks and shanties without suitable housing. And that's how the greatest portion of the world lives. Most people in the world live that way. Most of the world lives in poverty. What I've come to realise in recent years is I used to be very anti-development, and I used to have a very naturalist perspective about living with nature and living the old way. I've abandoned that thinking about living the old way and living with nature, and I've seen that technology and development and advancement lifts the world out of poverty. And the reason that technology advancement and development lifts the world out of poverty is because the technology improves the standard of living. And I've said this before in videos, technology improves people's standard of living, whether it's medical technology or whether it's smartphones so that people can learn more and access more knowledge, or whether it's refrigerators. Just having refrigerators lifts the standard of living so that we can store food. And the way people lived in the old way, they couldn't store food, they couldn't keep food for weeks and months on end, and food would go off and people would end up dying from eating off food. So I've abandoned the naturalist perspective, and I now see that you could argue that living the old way, living the naturalist way, is actually living in poverty without medicine, without refrigerators and microwaves and heaters to keep us warm in the winter. And back in those days, people just died in their 30s, and that's the reality of it. So you could argue that living the old way is living in poverty, and that wealth and technology and development lifts the world out of poverty. Some people would say that's a racist argument. I think it's more of an economic argument. I don't think it's about race. I think it's more of an argument about economics and technology, and race doesn't really come into it. But some people would say that saying living the old way is living in poverty is a racist argument. But like I said, it's more of a technology development argument. And what I've realised is as technology advances and it gets cheaper, and this is the capitalist model, and this is what the capitalists preach. It's like the refrigerator is invented to store food so that we can keep food for weeks. And the first refrigerators cost $5,000, and only the rich can have them. But in 100 years, every household has a refrigerator. So you see that over a century, everyone has refrigerators and microwaves now. So now the standard of living has lifted for everyone, and you can get a refrigerator and a microwave for $20 on eBay. So over the course of centuries, as we develop further, the standard of living improves more, and the technology gets better and improves life more and more, and it becomes cheaper and more affordable. And then people in the third world and the impoverished world start to get access to this technology, and it improves their living as well. See, because defeating poverty isn't just about giving people money, and this is what the communists don't understand. They talk about redistributing money and wealth, but it's not just about giving people money so that they have adequate income to buy things. It's also about people having access to technology. And so this is the capitalist argument. We develop and we develop and we develop until everyone has sufficient technology that nobody is living in abject poverty and nobody is suffering. So as I've talked about advanced civilizations in my videos before, and we're at a point now in our civilization where everyone has a refrigerator. Even in some of the worst parts of the world where there's no money and everyone lives in poverty, people still have refrigerators and microwaves. And it will get to the point in a few hundred years where the technology like that is so readily accessible that everyone on the planet will have that technology. So nobody will be dying in their 30s because they can't keep food for weeks on end. And the same applies to medical breakthroughs and medical technologies as well. They only get cheaper and more accessible the more we develop those technologies, medical technologies, and medicine becomes more accessible. So that in a few hundred years we're going to end poverty. And a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, but it's capitalism that is going to end poverty through development. Because in 300-400 years, all of this stuff, this medical technology, refrigerators, household goods, computers, smartphones, all that stuff will be so affordable. Absolutely everybody will have it. Everybody all over the world, and it will trickle down. It's trickle down economics. That's what they talk about. The wealth trickles down from the top to the bottom, and that's trickle down economics. And it's true. It's bloody true. Trickle down economics works. And in a few hundred years, all the starving people in Africa are going to have all this technology, so at least they won't be dying from malnourishment and inability to keep food, and they'll have access to medical technology as well. It's just going to take a few hundred more years of trickle-down economics and technological development before we get there. And this is what the capitalists say. They say, some people say we should go back to the natural way of living. Capitalism is destroying the world, and we should live in nature, in among the trees with the birds and the bees. Other people say we want the third world to develop. We want we want Africa, we want these countries to develop more, and we want them to have more material wealth, and that will defeat poverty. So, it's a matter of perspective, which way you look at it. What is poverty? And my view really is poverty is not having access to any money, any clean drinking water, any food, not having the ability to store food, not having access to medicine. These things are poverty. So I'll just come back to what I was saying about Australia. It's great. There's definitely people struggling in this country. I know a number of people who are struggling, but at least in this country we have Centrelink and we have welfare for people so that people have some money. So, that's good. So I think Australians are very privileged and they struggle to understand what real poverty is. Real poverty is where you'll die in a week and your children are dying of malnourishment because you have absolutely access to nothing. And there's too much of that in the world. There's far too much of that in the world. So we need to get that technology out there to the third world and get that technology out there to the parts of the world where they don't have that. And really, technology will resolve a lot of these problems, because what we want to get rid of is people dying unnecessarily. There's too many people dying unnecessarily. People don't necessarily have to have all this money. They don't have to be multi-millionaires. We don't need to give everyone all this money. We just want, the most important thing is that people have access to suitable medicine, that people have access to refrigerators and microwaves and ovens and stoves so they can store food and cook food safely, so that people don't die unnecessarily of food poisoning, and so they can store food, and so that people have suitable houses with showers and running water, so they can bathe and clean themselves, and so they don't die of disease that they pick up from not being able to wash properly, and so that people have access to basic goods like soap and sanitizers, and shampoo and all that sort of stuff, that's readily available and cheap in Australia, but that a lot of people don't have in parts of Africa and other parts of the world. So we want to get that stuff out there to those parts of the world at an affordable price and preferably for free for places where people just don't have any money. And what we'll see over the next few hundred years, now that we've reached this point since the Industrial Revolution, we'll see that more and more people will have access to all of those goods, and it will be affordable and everyone will be able to access it. And if we continue on this path that and people aren't going to like what I'm saying, especially the socialists and the communists won't like this, but I don't care because I recognise this as truth now. If we keep on this path that capitalist has us on of development, eventually everyone is going to have access to these basic necessities, and it will spread throughout the world, and there won't be any more poverty, and that will come through development, through that, like I said, trickle-down economics. So yeah, I've come to see that capitalism is lifting people out of poverty, and that capitalism will resolve poverty, and that technology really is and we need people to have suitable technology, suitable houses, and suitable access to goods. But we can redistribute some wealth, and welfare is the redistribution of wealth, and that's good, and we want that. And charity is always good as well. Giving money to people in need is always good. So yeah, so there's some thoughts about poverty. So drop a comment in the comment section what you think about poverty.